Welcome back, my dear friends, once again to part 20 in our continued study of this great book, the last book of the Bible, known as the Apocalypse or the Book of Revelation. The last video we were dealing with the destruction of 1/3 part of the Roman Empire. That was the Middle Eastern third, because remember the first third was destroyed in the city of Rome in the year 476 when Romulus Augustus was forced to resign by the Goths, and he was the very last emperor to sit in the city of Rome on the throne of the Caesars, or the throne of the emperors. So now we're dealing with the ending of the second part of the Roman Empire, the Middle Eastern part, because it fell naturally into three parts, the final part being the Eastern European part, whereas the Roman Empire had been divided for administrative purposes into four. It still fell more naturally into three, and it was destroyed in three parts. So we were dealing with a star which fell from heaven, and that was the Prophet Muhammad. He fell from a high position which he had been occupied in society in Arabia, and then he had to flee in what is known as the Hajj, and that's how he founded his religion. The key he was given, a key opens a door, so the key that he was given must have been something very powerful that he was able to win over not just his own immediate neighbourhood, but whole swathes, in fact a whole continent virtually, and that key was the Quran. So we move on now to the point where we deal with 5 months and 5 months, which is in total 300 years, 300 days and 300 years. So we can take it that for 300 years the Arab and Muslim empire, as it became, must have been dominant, and after that it would decline. So let us turn then to what Edward Gibbon has to say about it. He said, Rahadi was the last who deserved the title Commander of the Faithful. That was actually the title Caliph, and who represented the wealth and magnificence of the ancient caliphs. After him, the lords of the Eastern world were reduced to the most abject misery. So the 300 years came to an end with Rahadi, Commander of the Faithful, and that was another title for the caliphs. The Muslim conquest was a disaster for the Christians. The Muslims were reasonably tolerant of the Christians. The number of Christians began to decline, and this trend has continued up to our own day. Today there is only about 5% of the Middle East Christian. Christian writers saw it as God's punishment against their fellow Christians for their sins. Muhammad came 600 years after Christ, roughly. During those 600 years, whole areas must have become Christian. Today, there's not one Christian country in the Middle East with a majority of Christians. Lebanon is the nearest thing to a Christian country in the region. It has 41% Christian. So it too has a Muslim majority. Robert Louis Wicken is an American historian. He is a native of New Orleans, Louisiana. He is a Kievan Professor Emeritus of the history of the Christian Church at the University of Virginia. He is now 82 years of age. He wrote a book entitled Christianity Face to Face with Islam. It was published in the year 2010 by the First Things Religious magazine in America in September 2010. In the book, the author writes, no event during the first 1,000 years of Christianity was more unexpected, more calamitous and more consequential for Christianity than the rise of Islam. Few eruptions in history have transformed societies so totally and irrevocably as did the conquest and expansion by the Arabs in the 7th century. Most territories that were Christian 1300 years ago are now Muslim. Within a decade, 3 great cities in the Byzantine Empire fell to the Arabs. There were Damascus in 635, Jerusalem in 638, Alexandria in 641. So what he's saying here then is exactly what prophecies itself says. It says the sun and the air were darkened. Now, it had said that many times about the Roman Empire in the West, but it never used the term air. Here it uses not just the sun, which would be the government of the Middle Eastern part, the government, of course, in this case from Constantinople, but it also adds the air. Now, the sun is a star in the sky, and it's only in one particular place, but the air is everywhere. So it used the term heaven and earth too to describe the rulers, the ruling class and the people, but this is the first time it actually uses air, as much as to say air is everywhere, as much as to say that the change which will be brought about by the Arab armies would be greater and more extensive than perhaps nearly any other invasion or conquest in history. I mean, that may be difficult to prove, but certainly from this historian it is clear that the change, not just in religion, in politics, in culture, in the whole way of life, language, would be so extensive that Revelation adds the additional word, the air, to tell us, yes, this conquest by the Arabs would indeed be almost new and different in its totality.
Almost like, Neil, God had taken the very breath from the Christians because of their bad behaviour.
Yes.
And had allowed the breath to come into the Muslims.
Yes, exactly. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Now, the Assyrians of Iraq, the Babylonians of Iraq, the Phoenicians of Lebanon, the Philistines of Gaza, the Ammonites, Moabites and Edomites of Jordan, they were all once strong and influential races in the Middle East, as were the Sabaeans of Yemen. Where are they today? Mostly nowhere to be seen. There may be some remnants of them left, but those remnants are only small parts within the larger Arab culture. Those ancient peoples were all swallowed up by the Muslim conquerors, none more so than the land of the Pharaohs in Egypt. It could not have been more different to Arab culture and language, because Egypt, of course, is in Africa, and it had nothing whatsoever to do with the Arab culture or Arab race until the invasion after Muhammad arose and began his conquest. The throne of the Pharaohs had gone long before the Arabs arrived, that's true, but Coptic was the main language of Egypt at that time. Today, Arabic is the language of the great majority of the population, including the Christians.
Amazing.
Although the Christians use Coptic, which would be near enough to the language of the Pharaohs in their liturgy, it's scarcely spoken at all. The official name of Egypt is the Arab Republic of Egypt. The Arabs spread across the whole length of North Africa, the territory which the Roman Empire had in North Africa. Egypt, Libya, Algeria, Tunisia and Morocco cover the whole of North Africa, and all 5 countries are Arab and Muslim. So the Arabs well and truly wiped out the Roman Empire. It's only fair to say that they all have, certainly a lot of North African countries have a large Berber population, but officially they're Arab, with Arab leaders, and the official language, first official language is Arabic. So it well and truly wiped out the Roman Empire in the Middle East and North Africa, with one exception, Turkey. And there is a separate prophecy for Turkey and the Turks. There is a tiny country in the Middle East that is not Arab or Muslim. That tiny country is Israel. So it's so small. I mean, it's almost like as if it's somehow an afterthought, but it's so tiny and small you could hardly find it on the map, but it's certainly there.
It's certainly there.
And it certainly will be handled a lot in the future. All of Israel's neighbours are Arab and Muslim countries.
But what about the true Christians? Who were the true Christians going back in time?
Well, we dealt with that, and we will be actually dealing with that more and more, especially.
But it's a very good question, and it really, although Neil's going to deal with it greatly,
we will be
the real ones were the ones
we'll be dealing
that were
with it quite a lot in the next chapter.
Saw him when he resurrected, and really understood his. Really understood his message.
Yes.
Which was love and forgiveness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, the fact that most of the Middle East is Arab in language and culture, this is sure to make a huge difference at the time of the end, coming up to Armageddon. It would be very different if the Phoenicians were still in Lebanon, if the Babylonians were still in Iraq, if the Ammonites were still in Jordan. By the way, the capital of Jordan is Amman, which is called after the Ammonites.
Okay.
Or the pharaohs were still on their throne in Egypt. It would be a totally different scene. All these races have their own religion and languages. Now Israel is surrounded by just one principal language and one principal religion, the Arabic language and the Muslim religion. Many Arabs are descendants of Ishmael, who was the son of Abraham, and the Jews are descendants from Isaac, who was another son of Abraham. Jews and Arabs are therefore cousins. All this is bound to affect how the Arabs will respond to Christ and to Israel at the second coming. Rudyard Kipling was an English poet who wrote a poem called Recessional. He wrote it for Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee in 1897. And one line of it is, all out pomp of yesterday is one with Nineveh and Tyre. There are two lines from the poem. Nineveh was the capital of the Assyrian Empire. It was in Iraq, and Tyre was the capital of the Phoenicians, who were a great seafaring and trading people. Nineveh has long since crumbled beneath the desert sand. Tyre, which was in Lebanon, still exists, but its glory days as the Phoenician capital are definitely gone. So too are the glory days of Assyria, Babylon and Egypt. Babylon was one of the greatest cities of the ancient world. It has disappeared like the snows of yesteryear. It is buried beneath the desert sands of Iraq, not far from Baghdad. The English poet John Milton refers to the time when Egypt and Assyria strove in wealth and luxury. This is from Paradise Lost, Book 1, verse 720, and that time is indeed.
This is very, very beautifully written, Neil. Thank you. I love the way you write. I love the way you talk. It's very poetic, very meaningful, and very truthful. I'm very sorry about my phone going. Please excuse me, everybody in the audience, but I didn't want to go right back to the beginning, because sometimes when Neil is in the midst of things, it's very organic and it's very disruptive. I've turned my phone off now. And just to conclude with Patrick, the first Christians were those that walked with Jesus and had to share God's love.
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Yeah.
Yes, and of course, Turkey, ironically, was one of the first Christian countries, admittedly only in the western part, but where Christians in Turkey today, And now we turn then to that very country of Turkey, because they now take center stage. It was they who brought the final third of the Roman Empire to an end.
Wow.
They were raised up by God and by Christ for this purpose, without a doubt.
Sorry.
And nothing could stop it. So we turn then to the land of the Turk as we continue our study of chapter 9, by the way.
Chapter 9.
This is the fall of the Eastern European third, which was known as the Byzantine Empire, at the hands of the Turks. Release the 4 angels that are chained up at the great river Euphrates. These angels stand for human beings, like so often in Revelation. They stand for soldiers about to be sent into battle. 4 stands for thousands, and the invading armies were made up of 4 tribes. So the number 4 is appropriate for that. The angels had been chained up, the armies had been held back up to that time because the time had not arrived for them to go forth and conquer, but now it had arrived. It had come for them to go forth. Jesus, who controls world events from heaven, knew that the time had come. Chained at the great river Euphrates. The Euphrates rises in Turkey, so that is where our attention is now directed. They were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year. This stands for 396 years and 1 month. This period is arrived at in this way. An hour, a 12th of a day, stands for 30 days. But then we automatically transfer that to 30 years. A day stands for a year. A month stands for 30 days, which is 30 years. A year stands for 365 days, which is 365 years. It is based on a day for a year principle. So you might think, dear viewers, that you would need a degree in maths to work this out, and I must be perfectly honest, I would never be able to work it out myself. It was worked out by Dr. John Thomas, and it was also commented on by the Scotsman in this book, 13 lectures
Can you bring that up to
on
the camera so that we can, the people can
which we've
see
already,
the book?
Yes,
This is that's beautiful. Thank
we've
you,
already looked at it.
Thank you, Neil.
13 lectures on the things revealed in the Apocalypse by a well-known son of Scotland.
Lovely.
Hold it for a while, yes.
No, that's... Yep. Thank you.
Robert Roberts.
Yeah.
So
Lovely.
he gives here an hour, a month, a day, a year, a month, 30 years, and a year, 360 years. I would say this, dear viewers, it is a complicated mathematical formula, and for the moment concentrate on the main message of the book of Revelation, but the time periods, I would say, they take an awful long time to understand, even for people like me who've been studying it all our lives, as it were.
And for those really that want to go further into history, philosophy, politics, but what you're saying is, for those that just want to understand the main, message, it's not necessary to get lost.
Yes, to go in too much into the time periods. There are mostly in Revelation it is simply a day for a year, which is quite simple.
Yeah.
But here it is not, and then in another chapter 11 as well, chapter 11, it is not. It is a different time scale. But as I say, yes, you can by all means go into it for yourself, but for the moment, if you don't happen to understand it, if it's too complicated,
don't worry.
Don't worry, accept what the main message is.
Would this be okay to stop as our time is up,
yes,
and then go straight back into the next?
Yes, all right then, we can continue.
Sure.
Then. Yes, that's fine, we can continue then with the Turkish invasion in the next session.